Welcome to Jesus Book Reviews, a newly established podcast series where I, Dominic Volpe, host a consideration of different Jesus-inspired literature. In this episode, we'll be discussing The Jesus I Never Knew by Philip Yancey. And it's advised you get ready, Dr. McCracken, for this one is a doozy. The Jesus I Never Knew is a book written by Philip Yancey which serves the purpose of examining Jesus from a limited perspective. This is best realized in its introductory chapter, where Yancey considers modern interpretations of Jesus in the light of historian Barbara Tuchman's rule for writing history, namely, to refrain from using flash forwards, which can diminish the semblance of tension and drama in events as they unfold. He then resolved to write and tell the story of Jesus, and not his own story of what he has gathered for many years of people trying to think about the Lord for themselves. It is in this context that Philip Yancey proposed that when considering Jesus' life within the limited capacities of his time, relying prominently on historical context and the reality of human qualities like interaction and emotion, one can participate in the conditions of the history of Jesus and perhaps gain insight that could not have been grasped otherwise. Overall, I found Yancey's claim to prove true for me when reading his book. I realized things about Jesus that I previously overlooked and appreciated the approach he took to telling Jesus' story rather than his own. In what seemed to me a very real sense, I came to understand Jesus better by experiencing what really went on in his time, and I benefited from it. Transitioning into the consideration of the choices Philip Yancey made in his book, I first find it important to say that he believed Jesus was a significantly divine, exalted, historical, and influential cornerstone for the Christian faith, which he himself unmistakably aligns with. He is a man who cares a great deal about the person Jesus and who has spent much of his life considering what Jesus' time on earth means for people today. Thus, when he writes not as a critic, but as a believer of Jesus' claims, and as he shared in his first chapter, with doubts of his own to confront about him. Now, Philip Yancey organized his book contents into 3 parts directed towards bringing clarity to who Jesus was, why Jesus came, and what Jesus left behind. He considered the Gospels in chronological order, beginning with Jesus' birth and moving through topics like the Sermon on the Mount and his miracles before discussing his ascension and then the implications of all of his life for us. The way in which he supported his claim was through a style of showing rather than telling, and exploring rather than reporting. This goes to say that in each chapter, Yancey engaged with Jesus' life events in the Gospels with the limited perspective he believed could bring great insight. He documented his thought processes, his questions, his findings from outside sources, and his experiences that helped develop the ideas he was uncovering. Rather than providing supporting evidence for his thesis in an informational manner, he implemented what it claimed and walked his readers through the gospel story along with him, sharing what he found and leaving it up to them to consider if the Jesus that he was describing matched their presuppositions of him. A key component of Yancey's argument for his in-the-moment approach to viewing Christ's life was the consideration of plausible emotions and responses that hearers and onlookers of Jesus could have had. This was to draw attention to qualities of the Gospels that may be easily overlooked. And to illustrate this, I've gathered examples from the book. The first example is found in chapter 2, where Jesus' birth story is considered. In light of the many displays of modern Christmas cheer around the birth of Jesus, Yancey said the following words about the days leading up to our Savior's birth. Today, as I read the accounts of Jesus' birth, I tremble to think of the fate of the world resting on the responses of 2 rural teenagers. And when considering the responses of their parents, he said, what must they have felt? Did they respond like so many parents of unmarried teenagers today, with an outburst of moral fury, and then a period of sullen silence until at last the bright-eyed newborn arrives to melt the ice and arrange a fragile family truce? In this text, we see how the introduction of feelings, such as worry, serve to bring depth and humanity to the birth of the Savior we so easily see in perfect colors. The second example is from chapter 10, as Yancey describes Jesus' triumphal entry. After describing a typical Roman entrance with golden chariots, banners waved, and officers in polished armor filling the area, he says the following. In Jesus' triumphal entry, the adoring crowd makes up the ragtag procession. the lame, the blind, the children, the peasants from Galilee and Bethany. When the officer looks for the object of their attention, he spies a forlorn figure, weeping, riding on no stallion or chariot, but on the back of a baby donkey, a borrowed coat draped across its backbone serving as his saddle. Yes, there is a whiff of triumph on Palm Sunday, but not the kind of triumph that might impress Rome, and not the kind that impressed crowds in Jerusalem for long either. This is yet another clear example of how the author utilized a likely response in a moment to make a point about a key circumstance from Jesus' ministry. Some of the specific qualities of Yancey's writing that were most pivotal in my personal reaction to the book were the way he slowly worked his way through the different stages of Jesus' life in the gospel. This allowed me to pay attention to details that I hadn't before. And additionally, it was Yancey's reference to personal experiences, which almost always included different views of Jesus. This definitely broadened my perspective of Jesus' story and allowed me to build an appreciation for different ways of viewing him. I found Yancey's approach to discussing the events of Jesus' life to be engaging and persuasive. I liked how he included personal experiences, real-world examples, and quotes to introduce topics or other meaningful insights into what he was discovering. It was effective for me as well to spend so much time on specific components of the Gospels, like how entire chapters were dedicated to the Beatitudes or to Jesus' miracles or to his passion. Drawing near to these stories I have known and read and spending extended time in them further developed my understanding of their whole context and effect. It helped me to see things that I hadn't before. Something I was cautious of in Yancey's writing was when he would ascertain feelings to people in different situations. I found myself taking a step back and considering the context for those moments for myself. For example, I wondered about how probable it would have been for Mary and Joseph to have made awkward explanations in the months leading up to Jesus' birth, and then proceeded from there. Frequently, I appreciated Yancey's depiction of circumstances like these, but in some cases I felt his suppositions may have been an over-exaggeration of people's true reactions. After reading The Jesus I Never Knew, I've learned the importance and value of slowing down to consider the content and context of the gospel stories, and the Bible for that matter, in unhurried ways. Typically for me in my quiet times, I am very focused on quantity, how much I'm reading, but through this book I've realized just how much you can pull from a text if you just have the courage to slow down and look at just a few verses instead. Additionally, I've learned how to engage different perspectives of Jesus with curiosity. Yancey's frequent inclusion of distinct views of Jesus and his life events gave me this opportunity and stripped away a lot of bias I now realize I had towards how things are supposed to be when it comes to God. Finally, I've also picked up on many insights into Jesus' life that I've come to believe in, and two of these include Jesus' exertion of resistible yet ultimate power, and the reality that we live in times similar to when Jesus had yet risen, as we also are waiting for him to return. If nothing else sticks with me from this review of Philip Yancey's The Jesus I Never Knew, I hope it would be an intention to practice what the author did in his approach to Jesus' story. Truly, truly, I say to you, he has shown me the value in engaging the Gospels with special and deliberate attention to detail and the conditions that they include. That's all for this episode, but have a good one.